Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to day number 1 of my Dungeons & Dragons Accessories week. So the theme of this week is I'm going to go over 5 different types of accessories that I really enjoy having in my collection, as well as things that I just enjoy using when running the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. Now these accessories aren't necessarily going to be specific to just Dungeons & Dragons. I mean, most role-playing games have some form of these in some capacity or another. But my collection focuses primarily on Dungeons & Dragons, so that's where I'm going to go with. So today I want to talk about miniatures. There's a big reason for that, and I want to kind of compare some of the more modern miniatures. So I just got some of my older ones that are amongst my favorites in my collection on display. So I got my Gargantuan White Dragon, which I love. My medium Black Dragon, which I've had for a very, very long time, since 2003. And this is one of the first instances of me getting a randomized plastic miniature that I actually wanted. And of course, my favorite monster of all time, my huge-sized Beholder. But these aren't the ones that I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about are the modern miniatures that you can get for the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. In particular, I want to compare and discuss 2 very different types of products that are currently being released, both by WizKids, oddly enough. So what I want to talk about today is the plastic pre-painted random miniatures versus the non-randomized unpainted miniatures. So there's 2 different product lines out for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this point in time. There are the Icons of the Realms, which come in boxes like this. They are, again, containing plastic pre-painted miniatures, and just some examples on the side here. And also, however, there are some non-randomized miniatures that you know exactly what you're getting. They're not painted, but they are primed, meaning that you can basically take them right out of the package and start painting them immediately. And these are the Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. And there's a big reason why I want to talk about these. Now, if you're into the Pathfinder role-playing game, Pathfinder has equivalents. I don't know what the name of the random pre-painted ones are, but they do have boosters similar to this. I think the boxes tend to be a little bit smaller, but they do have products similar to this, and they have, I think WizKids puts out both lines, but the WizKids Pathfinder set of miniatures is referred to as deep cuts. So if you're into Pathfinder, then there you go. So there's the product lines. But the reason I wanted to talk about these is I kind of want to share my opinions on which of these 2 types of products I prefer the most, and I'm going to be 100% totally upfront, and I'm not going to try to draw this out with suspense. I much prefer these to this. So there are a few reasons for that, and what I want to really start with is the price. So one of these boosters here, which comes with 4 miniatures inside, tends to retail in Canada, or at least in the part of Canada where I live, from anywhere from $20 to $25 plus taxes. So it can be pretty expensive. Now, the one thing about these is that they typically, although not necessarily all of them will, this set in particular, Storm King's Thunder, I think each box set came with 1 huge miniature, but there's no necessary guarantee that they're going to have that scale of miniatures and all the other ones. In fact, I want to say that the Tomb of Annihilation boxes are smaller. But what you get are 4 random miniatures. Now, I paid, I think, $23 for this, plus tax. When I got it initially. I did do an unboxing video of it way back when I first got it, but I have all 4 of the miniatures that I got in here back in the box, just so I can kind of show what I ended up getting at the time. So, just open this up. So the huge figure that I got was this Hill Giant, and the Hill Giant looks alright. But honestly, I could have gone the rest of my life without ever having this. So for me, this wasn't worth me spending the money on this box, especially for that one. I've got other Hill Giant miniatures. I mean, they may not be to the scale that 5th edition uses, but they still would have done the job. But here's the other 3. Whoops. So these are the other 3 miniatures that came in this massive box for $23. So I got the Hill Giant that I wasn't really looking for. I got a giant frog that I will never, ever, ever use. I've got a very kind of cheap-looking Hellhound. That again, I have Hellhound miniatures from a earlier line of D&D miniatures from back in 2003 that I would prefer to use over this. The one cool one that I did get is Cleef Kenric. So this is an iconic character, and he is someone that he was the main character in one of the Sundering novels. I think it was The Sentinel. And that was a really great book, and I actually really liked the character of Cleef Kenric. So in retrospect, I'm actually really happy to have this guy because it was a really cool story, and I liked the character. But those are what I got. So these are the 4 miniatures that I spent $23 plus tax. So it ended up being close to like $26 after all was said and done. Because where I live, it's 15% tax. So for every $10. It is $1.50, so yeah, it was like $26, $27 I think that I ended up paying overall. Or at the very least, it was around 24 bucks. So I still spent a lot of money on these miniatures, and I just don't really like them. Now, I do want to say there may be some positives to getting these. Now, for example, the Icons of the Realms tends to follow the current storylines that are going on in the Dungeons & Dragons game. For example, they had one for Elemental Evil, they had their Rise of Tiamat miniatures, they didn't have Curse of Strahd, I don't think, but they had just a generic set that came out around that time, if I recall. And they had the current one, the Tomb of Annihilation. So they do follow the current stories, and they do contain some of the iconic villains from that. So, for example, you're probably not going to find an Acererak miniature using like these ones here. So if you really want Acererak, then you can get him in these randomized boosters. But again, the issue for me is just the fact that it's way too much money for how little you get. And there's nothing else that comes in those boxes. For example, if they would have had stat cards for the creatures, for the characters, maybe some background information, just something that was in there other than just these plastic miniatures, then I would have been a little bit more satisfied with it. It's also kind of disappointing to me that, again, you're only getting 4 miniatures for the price. Now, if I were to compare it to way back with the original Dungeons & Dragons miniatures game, when the game first came out, they had the booster packs here that had 8 miniatures in each of these. So the initial boosters were 8 miniatures for $15, and then they did eventually raise the price to $20 per booster. But again, you were getting twice as much miniatures for around the same price. Now, they did have only a few sets that had huge-sized figures, like we've got here. So this was the War of the Dragon Queen. This was back in 2000 and I think this was probably around 2005, 2006. 2006 is when this came out. And what this one had was 1 huge miniature and 7 standard size random miniatures. So you still got 8 miniatures total. The earlier sets that had huge miniatures in it actually had 1 huge and then 8 regulars. So, but these were $30. Now for $30 you ended up getting 4 more miniatures. So for $10 you were getting 4 more minis. So even though I found these to be a bit too pricey for me to want to buy too many of them back in the day. So that's, like I said, sort of my biggest hang-up. And there's a lot of miniatures that I would consider to be kind of worthless in these sets. One of my least favorite things that they have is a lot of these sets will have invisible characters. So they're like your iconic or hero characters, but they're just in a clear plastic. And they're supposed to be, for when they have invisibility cast on them. Which is all well and good, but, that was 4 or 5 miniatures in each of those sets that instead of doing something like just reusing the same mold for a translucent miniature, they could have had 4 or 5 other unique miniatures in there. And I don't know about the more current sets, but some of the earlier sets had those invisible figures, as the rare in the box, so, or at a rare, like the highest rarity level. So that's just really, just not great. So I really disdain that, and that's why I've only ever bought one of these, and it took me until Storm King Sunder to actually try to go out and buy one. Now, on the other hand, I absolutely can't say enough good things about these Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. So I have a few different ones here, so I'll just kind of go over them quickly. So this is the Dragonborn Fighter. Now, the thing that I like about these, the price, first of all, is actually pretty good for these. I paid, it was $6 for these miniatures, so it's $3 a fig, and you're getting 2 miniatures inside of this package. So for me, that's just a good value. You're getting 2 different sculpts, 2 different looking miniatures, which I think are absolutely fantastic. The sculpt detail is actually pretty good, especially for these plastic miniatures. So they look nice, they're significantly cheaper, and you know what you're getting. So I've got the Dragonborn Fighter. I also have the Dragonborn Paladin, and I like the Paladins a lot, actually. They have sort of like larger figures to them, and of course on the back it shows examples of them, how they look when they're painted. So I didn't have any Dragonborn in my collection, so I like to have, now that I've got these, that certainly helped that. I've also got the Tiefling Sorcerer, and again you're getting 2 miniatures, so 2 different Tieflings. And they look really nice as well. And then I got a couple, so these are the first 2 sets of miniatures that I ever bought for this product line. And so I got the Human Wizard and I've got the Elf Ranger. And the reason that I actually bought these, I don't really necessarily ever plan to open these up. I might at some point, but right now I just really don't necessarily feel like doing it. But the reason that I did it is, like, on the back, they look like some of the more iconic characters from Dungeons & Dragons history. For example, the Elf Ranger looks like Drizzt, which is one of my favorite characters. I have all the novels. I really enjoy the character, so, like, for me, this just looks really cool. And I've got 2 different Drizzt minis to go with the 3 others that I have actually at this point now. So I just really like the character. But the first one I bought was the Human Wizard, because to me at least, and I might be wrong, but this to me looks like an older version of Mordenkainen, who is one of the most iconic wizards in Dungeons & Dragons history. So I just really like the way that looked, and I love the sculpt on this guy. It just looks so cool that I wanted to get these miniatures. Now, in addition, you can also get some really sweet monsters. So I picked up these Mind Flayers. And I just absolutely, Mind Flayers are one of my favorite creatures in all of D&D. I don't use them that often. I think I've only ever run them in a couple of different adventures. I have one kind of funny story about Mind Flayers, or a Mind Flayer anyway, that I might tell in a future video. But again, there's just 2 really nice looking sculpts on these Mind Flayers. And the great thing about these is that if I were to try to find, like, if one of the D&D mini sets with the randomized figs came out with these miniatures in them, and these very well may be resculpts, although I think the scale might be a little bit off for that. But if these were to be in one of those randomized sets, these would be considered rare miniatures. And which means that, the odds of me actually getting one of these is slim to nil, especially considering that I'd probably only buy 1 or 2 boosters trying to find it. But with this, I've got 2 Mind Flayers and 2 really nice sculpts, really cool looking figures, and I picked them up for $6. So yeah, I mean, to me, this is the no-brainer. This is the way I much prefer to get them. And of course, I have the Beholder. Now, I'm going to leave this, even if I do open up the other ones just to paint them, this is going to stay sealed, I think, just because Beholder is my absolute favorite monster of all time, and I just kind of want to have this on display. But, so again, if this were in one of those randomized sets, it would be considered a rare, or I don't know if they even have rarities above rare anymore. With the old miniatures game, they didn't, so it was just common, uncommon, and rare. But I think some of the later ones may have had like ultra rare or super rare miniatures. Anyway, to get one of these and one of those, I'd probably have to buy several boosters, spending upwards of $100 in the hopes of trying to maximize my chances of getting it. This was $6.50. So for $6.50, I have one of the coolest looking Beholder miniatures I've seen. So that's kind of the reason that I wanted to really try to spread awareness of these miniatures. The only downside to them is that they are unpainted. So if you want to collect these and you want to use them in your game, you know, if you're okay with having them unpainted, that's fine. There are people that aren't too hung up on it. I'm not overly fussed if somebody comes into one of my sessions with unpainted miniatures. That doesn't really mean anything to me. But if you want them painted, then you have to paint them yourself. That's sort of the downside to them. So there's more of a time investment in these miniatures, but I think personally I would much rather have the miniatures that I want for a decent price. And again, the only one of those packages that has a single miniature is the Beholder, and I mean, just look at the size of the thing. So for like I said, I paid around 20, I'm going to say around 24 just to be on the safe side. So for $24 I could have gotten, so this at $6.50, so the Mind Flayers were also $6, so that's $12.50, and let's just throw in the Dragonborn Paladin, which was $6. So that is, what is that, $18.50? And so let's also throw in our Human Wizard. Sure, why not? So all of these would cost $24.50 plus tax. So for $24.50 I can get 2 awesome human miniatures, 2 Dragonborns, 2 Mind Flayers, and 1 Beholder. So that is 7 miniatures that I want, that I specifically wanted to buy for 50 cents more than these 4 randomized ones, of only one of which I'm actually happy to have in my collection. So that's sort of where I stand on the Icons of the Realms versus Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. I would much rather be spending my money on the Marvelous Miniatures. I think that this is the superior line. It goes back a little bit to the days, you know, even before these things ever came out. This is how miniatures used to be sold. You used to buy the ones that you actually wanted. Now they all used to be like lead or pewter, but you know, now we're at the age of plastic, which is fine. But again, the price, for me, the price is just way better for these, and you know what you're getting. You're getting something that you actually want in your collection versus the potential to have some filler figs that you'll probably never ever use at your table. One miniature that you actually, you know, really like, and one that you're okay with, but you didn't really need to have it. So again, that's how I feel about these. But let me know in the comments below how you feel. One last thing I should mention, because I neglected it before. I have had people say that the Dungeons & Dragons cooperative board games, like Castle Ravenloft, Wrath of Ashardalon, Legend of Drizzt, Elemental Evil, and Tomb of Annihilation are also great ways to get miniatures. I sort of agree with that. The issue is that where I live, those board games go for over $100. I think it's like $115 for Tomb of Annihilation. Now I spent around $75 to $80 on the other 3 that I have, which is Castle Ravenloft, Wrath of Ashardalon, and Legend of Drizzt. Now they do have some nice miniatures in them, absolutely. And they tend to have quite a few. Like the regular fodder monsters, there tends to be 3 each of. And then you've got some villains, and a lot of the miniatures that are in there used to be rares in the other sets. The issue is that they're non-painted as well, so you're kind of looking at something similar to these, that if you want them painted, you're going to have to invest some time into that. Now they do have some, what do they call them, special editions, or they have their premium editions, I think they're called, which goes for around $160 where I live. And they come with the painted miniatures. That's just, for me, that's just way too much money. I'd rather spend, you know, I'd rather spend $6 to $7 at a time, just grabbing a couple of miniatures every once in a while that I want to get. So again, let me know what you guys think of these miniature product lines in the comments below, and let me know if you're a fan of the Icons of the Realm, if you like the idea, or if you enjoy the randomness to them, if you like the idea of just cracking and seeing what's inside, or would you rather have the non-randomized ones that you have to paint yourself. So let me know in the comments below. I look forward to reading that, and I hope you enjoyed this first part of my accessory week. So again, I'm going to be doing a few different types of accessories. Thank you guys very much for watching my video on miniatures. We'll see you next time.